Liam Hargraves was a quiet name on a loud street, until he became the silent architect of a drug empire that stretched from Manchester to Moscow. With the help of Detective Sergeant Alan Vexley, a corrupt cop buried deep inside British law enforcement, Liam built a criminal machine that did more than flood the UK with cocaine. It secretly bankrolled Russian assassinations, arms deals, and political bribes across Eastern Europe. This isn't just a story about drugs. It's a story about power, betrayal, and the global reach of a criminal underworld that nearly got away with everything. Liam Hargraves didn't look like someone destined to build one of the most powerful drug empires the UK had ever seen. He was quiet, careful, and rarely showed signs of ambition. In the mid-2000s, he worked the corners of Toxteth in Liverpool, delivering wraps of cocaine and weed for local crews who barely knew his name. While other dealers flashed cash and got caught up in turf wars, Liam stayed in the background. But what no one noticed was how he studied everything: the routes, the suppliers, the mistakes others made. He was learning, observing, and planning. He never took unnecessary risks. He built trust with suppliers by never shorting them, never getting caught, and never asking too many questions. Within a few years, he quietly became known for reliability, and his reputation spread across Merseyside. He began dealing directly with contacts in Amsterdam and Rotterdam, cutting out local middlemen who had always taken a slice. This wasn't about greed. It was about control. By removing layers, he reduced his exposure and maximized his profits. It was this strategic thinking that began to set him apart. By 2012, Liam had expanded into Manchester. Instead of running crews himself, he franchised his operations, giving smaller dealers access to high-quality product at fixed prices. They used his routes, his connections, and his security protocols. In return, he took a percentage of every transaction. If anyone stepped out of line, they were cut off completely. No threats, no violence, just silence. In a business known for bloodshed, Liam's calm, structured approach made him both respected and feared. He avoided flashy cars and nightclubs, choosing instead to invest his growing income into businesses like used car lots, storage units, and a courier service that would later prove crucial to his empire's expansion. These legitimate fronts gave him plausible cover while allowing him to move large quantities of product without raising suspicion. He operated under multiple false names and ran everything through encrypted channels. He wasn't building a gang. He was building a system. Most of his rivals dismissed him as just another mid-level player, but behind the scenes, Liam was already laying the groundwork for a much bigger move. He knew that to scale his empire beyond the UK, he needed foreign partnerships. He needed volume, reach, and protection. And in 2015, he found all three when he made a quiet deal with a man tied to one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in Eastern Europe. That was the moment everything changed. What started as small-time dealing in Liverpool had just become something far more dangerous. The turning point came quietly, without warning, during what seemed like just another shipment arriving through the port of Felixstowe. Hidden among boxes of imported electronics was a tightly wrapped brick, marked with a symbol Liam had never seen before: a two-headed eagle etched into wax. Along with it came a message, relayed through a Dutch contact he barely trusted. A new supplier wanted a meeting. Most dealers would have hesitated. Liam didn't. Within 2 weeks, he was on a plane to Tallinn, Estonia, under a false passport, stepping into a world far beyond anything he had encountered before. The man who greeted him at a private hotel wasn't flashy, violent, or loud. He was cold, formal, and spoke with precision. His name was never given, only a code name, Oral. He represented a shadowy network known as Volkova Bratva, a Russian criminal syndicate believed to have roots in both the FS intelligence networks. They didn't just move drugs, they moved weapons, laundered billions, and controlled entire political figures in Eastern Europe. Aurel offered Liam a deal that seemed impossible to refuse: exclusive rights to move their cocaine across the UK in exchange for discretion, loyalty, and efficiency. It was more than a supply chain. It was access to global power. Liam agreed, but with conditions. He wanted control over distribution, his own routes, and the ability to use the partnership to expand deeper into Europe. Aurel accepted. From that moment, Liam was no longer just a dealer. He was now a trusted link in an international criminal syndicate, managing operations that reached from Manchester to Moscow. The shipments began immediately, hidden in refrigerated trucks, under frozen meat, buried in furniture, or disguised as legitimate imports. The drugs came in bulk, but they weren't the end product. They were the vehicle. As Liam would soon learn, the cocaine was only part of the operation. What truly mattered was the money it generated. That cash moved quickly through UK shell companies, bounced across offshore accounts in Cyprus, and ultimately returned to Russia, where it was used to fund arms deals, bribe politicians, and in some cases, finance contract killing. Liam had stepped into a machine much larger than himself. He didn't control it, but he had a seat at the table. To keep his new partners happy, Liam expanded fast. He bought more storage sites, recruited logistics experts, and began building an internal structure that mimicked corporate hierarchy. His empire now had departments: transport, finance, security, and enforcement. What began as street deals in Liverpool had now evolved into something almost invisible, highly organized, internationally connected, and protected by some of the most dangerous people on the planet. At first glance, the flow of cocaine through the UK seemed like any other high-level trafficking route. Hidden in cargo, moved through back channels, sold on the streets. But beneath the surface, something far more complex was taking shape. Liam Hargreaves wasn't just moving product. He was managing a logistics chain that doubled as a laundering mechanism for Russian money and influence. Every kilogram of cocaine was a financial instrument, designed to wash dirty money into clean accounts while funding darker operations far from British soil. The deals were deceptively simple. The Volkova Bratva provided the drugs, and Liam's network moved them. Profits were split, but Liam's share was immediately reinvested. He bought up real estate, set up import tech firm companies, and acquired small tech firms, many of which served no real purpose beyond moving funds between borders. Some were based in the Isle of Man, others in Cyprus or Malta. Transactions were processed through cryptocurrency exchanges, obscure banks in Central Asia, and fake consulting firms. To an outsider, it looked like an aggressive investment strategy. In reality, it was financial camouflage. But what Liam didn't fully realize, at least at first, was how the money was being used once it left the UK. Intelligence reports later revealed that millions from his shipments funded the purchase of weapons in war-torn regions like Donbass and Transnistria. Arms dealers tied to Russian military groups were being paid in Bitcoin and euros, with traces leading back to accounts first filled by Liam's operations. These deals weren't small either. Some included anti-tank missiles, sniper rifles, and night vision tech smuggled through Eastern Europe. The violence that followed these transactions was far removed from Liam's world, but it was real. Political enemies disappeared. Journalists investigating corruption were found dead under suspicious circumstances. Regions destabilized by conflict were being quietly armed by money that had passed through British ports, under the noses of customs and border patrols. And yet, the system worked. Because it was designed to blend into the ordinary, Liam's Courier company became central to the scheme. On paper, it offered same-day deliveries across the UK. In practice, it was used to shuttle high-grade cocaine between regional cells, with profits funneled into larger Russian operations. Each delivery helped mask the movement of cash, enabling the syndicate to hide its true operations. No one asked questions. because everything seemed legal. By 2018, Liam wasn't just the UK's largest independent supplier. He was a trusted conduit for international crime. The drugs, once just a product, had become something else entirely. A cover for global manipulation and silent warfare. On the surface, Liam's growing network appeared clean and efficient. His businesses had all the markings of legitimacy: company logos, payroll systems, delivery vans, and well-dressed managers. But beneath this polished exterior was a darker infrastructure hidden in plain sight. One of the most disturbing discoveries came later, during police raids in West Yorkshire, when officers uncovered a network of rural warehouses registered under shell companies. These isolated properties, scattered along country roads and surrounded by farmland, were believed to be storage facilities for bulk drug shipments. In truth, they served a much more sinister purpose. The most infamous of these locations was a converted agricultural site near Pontefract, known within the network as the Pit. It looked like an old livestock barn, long abandoned and overgrown. But behind reinforced doors and beneath layers of insulation were soundproofed rooms, heavy-duty chains, and industrial drainage systems. Forensic teams later confirmed traces of blood, hair, and tissue, evidence of violent interrogations and suspected executions carried out by Russian enforcers. This site wasn't used to store product. It was used to control people through fear. Those who betrayed the network, dealers who skimmed product, couriers who talked too much, or outsiders who stumbled too close, were brought here. Inside the Pit, there was no negotiation, no second chances. Survivors were rare, and those who did make it out never spoke to authorities. It was a place designed to erase problems. Cameras were installed in every corner, not for protection but for proof. Videos were used as warnings, circulated within trusted circles to keep lower-level operatives in line. The message was clear: betrayal wasn't just punished, it was obliterated. Another site, just outside Wakefield, operated as a distribution hub disguised as a furniture supplier. Here, cocaine arrived in concealed compartments within imported goods. Workers, many of them undocumented migrants, were paid in cash to unload shipments without asking questions. If anyone became suspicious or threatened exposure, they were either paid off or disappeared. Records showed that several employees went missing within months of starting work, though no formal reports were ever filed. The deeper authorities dug, the more disturbing the pattern became. These warehouses weren't just part of a smuggling operation, they were tools of psychological and physical control. Liam had created an empire where violence wasn't public, it was hidden, quiet, and methodical. Unlike traditional gangs that thrived on street intimidation, his organization enforced loyalty through disappearance and silence. This shadowy infrastructure allowed Liam's empire to expand unchecked. It operated in the gaps between jurisdictions, using rural isolation to hide crimes that urban police forces never saw coming. By the time anyone realized what was happening, it was already too late for many who had entered and never returned. In late 2018, the calm and calculated nature of Liam Hargrave's empire was shaken by a single misstep, one that revealed just how brutal the consequences of betrayal could be. Rhys Nolan was a 23-year-old runner from Bolton, who had only been part of the network for a few months. He was ambitious, eager to impress, and had recently been promoted to oversee smaller regional drops. It was a low-risk position, but Rhys had ideas far above his station. Greed got the better of him when he spotted an opportunity during a routine transfer headed for the London hub. Instead of delivering the full shipment, Rhys quietly removed several kilos of high-purity cocaine and attempted to move it through a contact of his own in Birmingham. He believed, like many before him, that Liam's empire was too big to notice. He underestimated just how closely every movement was monitored, especially those linked to the Russians. Within 48 hours, discrepancies were flagged by an internal auditor in Liam's logistics operation. The signal was sent, and the response came swiftly, not from Liam's men, but from the Russian enforcers embedded within his network. Reese was last seen leaving a service station off the M6. His car was later found abandoned in a residential area, but there was no sign of him. Days later, his body was pulled from the River Thames. He was wrapped in chains, with multiple bones broken and his fingers removed. A clear message. Authorities were immediately alarmed, not just by the level of violence, but by the precision of it. This wasn't gang retribution, it was calculated, ritualistic, and professional. The murder marked the first time British law enforcement realized they were dealing with something beyond local organized crime. The case was initially treated as a drug killing, but forensic analysis of the chains linked them to a shipping container company registered in Moldova, a firm already flagged in international arms investigations. It was the first real connection between Liam's empire and broader geopolitical operations. Behind closed doors, the murder sent a message through the network. Fear surged through the lower ranks. By early 2019, the foundations of Liam Hargraves's empire remained solid, but tiny cracks had started to appear. Mostly unnoticed at first, buried in spreadsheets and surveillance reports. Law enforcement had begun monitoring financial anomalies, not because of the drugs, but because of the money. The scale of cash flowing through Liam's various businesses no longer matched their declared revenue. Car dealerships were reporting monthly sales figures that didn't align with inventory. A warehouse registered as inactive was still consuming thousands of pounds in electricity. Quiet investigations began to piece together the discrepancies. It was a small team within the UK's National Crime Agency that first saw the pattern. What looked like isolated cases of fraud started forming a larger puzzle. The turning point came when an international finance analyst, assisting on a separate cybercrime case, flagged a cluster of transactions moving through accounts in Moldova, Cyprus, and the Isle of Man, all with subtle ties to Liam's shell companies. One account in particular stood out, a Cyprus-based consulting firm with no employees, yet it had processed £17 million sterling, 0 pence, in less than 6 months. The money trail became the first real entry point into the empire. Investigators followed the digital breadcrumbs through encrypted wallets, false identities, and offshore trusts. Slowly, they began to uncover what the drugs had been hiding, a financial network designed not only to wash proceeds from cocaine sales, but to deliver clean money into the hands of Russian operatives. In one instance, it was traced to a Belarusian election campaign riddled with corruption allegations. In another, it funded property deals in Montenegro suspected of being fronts for arms storage. The most disturbing lead linked a series of payments to a shell firm believed to be connected to an assassination in Lviv, Ukraine, where a government informant had been gunned down outside his home. Despite these discoveries, law enforcement lacked the hard evidence needed to make arrests. Liam had insulated himself behind a wall of proxies, using silent partners and legal loopholes to avoid direct exposure. Each company was layered, registered under different jurisdictions, making investigations painfully slow. But one misstep changed everything. During a routine tax review of one of Liam's courier companies, auditors found an encrypted backup drive left in a company's safe. Believing it contained payroll data, they sent it to the NCA. When analysts cracked the encryption, they uncovered a hidden spreadsheet, mapping out payments, shipping routes, and coded references to politicians, arms dealers, and enforcement targets. It was a glimpse into something far bigger than drug trafficking. It was the blueprint of a shadow economy. And the beginning of the end. Detective Sergeant Alan Vexley had long been seen as a reliable figure within the Greater Manchester Police. Calm under pressure, methodical in his work, and known for securing several high-profile drug busts early in his career, he had built a reputation as someone who could be trusted. Colleagues admired his attention to detail, while superiors valued his discretion. But behind that polished exterior, Vexley was playing a dangerous double game, feeding crucial intelligence to the very criminals he was meant to be chasing. His involvement with Liam Hargraves didn't begin with bribery or blackmail. It started subtly, almost innocently. Small favors here and there, passing on word of upcoming raids or advising on how to avoid certain patrol routes. Over time, the exchanges became more deliberate. In return for information, Vexley received regular cash payments hidden in legitimate financial activity. Rent payments on a flat he didn't live in, consulting fees for work he never did, and deposits into offshore savings accounts held under an alias. For nearly 5 years, Vexley acted as an internal shield for Liam's empire. He diverted attention from key shipments, misdirected surveillance efforts, and even buried preliminary reports from junior officers who noticed inconsistencies. But his most valuable contribution was tipping off Liam about law enforcement's growing awareness of financial irregularities. Each time the authorities got close to identifying a shell company or cross-border transaction, the trail would suddenly go cold. Someone, somewhere, was clearly leaking sensitive data. The truth began to surface after a major shipment was intercepted at the port of Dover. Hidden within crates labeled as commercial plumbing supplies, officers discovered over 400 kilograms of high-purity cocaine. Embedded in the shipment logs was a strange detail, a detour logged by the lorry's GPS, showing a brief stop near a police vehicle depot not listed in the official route. That irregularity triggered internal scrutiny. When investigators quietly accessed communications metadata around the time of the seizure, one name came up repeatedly: Alan Vexley. Phone records showed frequent late-night calls to a burner number already flagged in the Liam Hargraves investigation. Bank statements revealed payments from a Cyprus-based logistics firm linked to a money laundering probe. Under mounting pressure, Vexley was brought in under the pretense of a routine debrief. He never returned to active duty. Faced with overwhelming evidence and a potential lifetime sentence, Vexley agreed to cooperate. In exchange for partial immunity, he provided detailed testimony about Liam's network, including warehouse locations, laundering strategies, and the names of officials who had taken bribes. His confession was a breakthrough. The Empire's invisible shield had finally broken, and with it, the operation began to unravel. On the way from Liam's home under view to Sainte-Marie-Valérite, ever since invincibility surrounding Liam Hargraves's empire collapsed with startling speed, over the next several months, authorities launched coordinated raids across England, targeting properties, businesses, and safe houses linked to the network. In total, 16 locations were hit in one day, an unprecedented strike, led by a combination of UK law enforcement, financial crime units, and international intelligence agencies. What they found confirmed the worst fears about the scale and sophistication of the operation. In a luxury estate outside Manchester, Liam's personal residence was raided at dawn. Inside, investigators uncovered hidden compartments built into the walls and floorboards, filled with encrypted phones, false passports, and £600,000 sterling, 0 pence, in cash. But more telling was a steel case buried beneath the garage, containing a series of handwritten notes and diagrams that appeared to outline contingency plans, escape routes, alternate identities, and a list of offshore accounts. Liam had prepared for this moment, but he hadn't stayed to face it. Elsewhere, warehouses in Leeds, Sheffield, and Leicester were found stocked with smuggled goods, crates of false-bound containers, and ledgers tracking the movement of drugs across the UK and into mainland Europe. In one of the storage units, a dismantled radio jammer and surveillance equipment pointed to a level of counterintelligence far beyond street-level crime. Dozens of arrests followed, but many of the key players had already disappeared, warned in advance or hidden behind layers of proxies and aliases. As the investigation deepened, more disturbing links emerged. A hidden server discovered in one of Liam's business locations contained evidence of communications with Russian operatives, including coded messages referencing political targets and encrypted files believed to contain surveillance footage from foreign soil. The files were immediately sent to Interpol, triggering joint investigations in at least 3 countries. Interpol soon connected Liam's network to 5 unsolved murders across Germany and Poland, each tied to political dissidents or former intelligence officers. Another lead pointed to a weapons deal in Romania involving anti-aircraft equipment, funded by shell companies that had once moved money through Liam's hands. What had begun as a domestic drug now stretched into a complex international web of crime and influence. Despite the wave of arrests and asset seizures, one question remained. Where was Liam? His name was placed on Europe's most wanted list, and airports across the continent were on alert. But the man who once controlled an empire worth hundreds of millions had vanished without a trace. While investigators celebrated a major breakthrough, they also knew the truth. Without Liam in custody, the full extent of his global network might never be uncovered. The architect was still out there, and the machine he built had already outlived him. For over a year, Liam Hargraves remained a ghost. No digital footprints, no verified sightings, no transactions tied directly to his name. He had vanished with the same precision and planning that had once built his empire. Law enforcement agencies across Europe launched a coordinated manhunt, focusing on countries with weak extradition laws and a history of harboring organized crime. Interpol flagged him as a high preeminent international fugitive, and MI5 dedicated a special task force to tracking his movements. But Liam had spent years preparing for this. Every identity, every safe house, every route was planned in advance. Leads surfaced occasionally: a blurred CCTV image at a Croatian border, a luxury apartment in Prague rented under an alias, a tip-off about a private boat in the Adriatic. Each trail went cold just as quickly as it appeared. He used burner phones, cash-only transactions, and handlers to move between safe locations. Intelligence reports suggested he had passed through Turkey and the Balkans, possibly spending time in Serbia under the protection of local enforcers linked to his former Russian allies. Then, in the spring of 2022, a breakthrough came from an unexpected place. A low-level arms arrested in Montenegro provided a single name during questioning: the Englishman. He claimed the man was living under a new identity in a remote villa near the Albanian border, protected by a private security team. At first, authorities doubted the tip until satellite images confirmed unusual activity at the site, including encrypted radio signals and frequent visits from vehicles registered to shell companies linked to Liam's old network. Montenegrin special forces moved in under the cover of darkness. The villa was heavily fortified, with reinforced gates, private guards, and surveillance equipment. But Liam had grown too comfortable. When the raid began, he didn't resist. He was found in a hidden basement room, surrounded by weapons, multiple passports, and over €1,200,000, 0 cents, in various currencies. He looked older, thinner, but his calm demeanor remained unchanged. He was arrested on the spot. Within days, Liam was extradited to the UK under tight security. Upon arrival, he was immediately charged with multiple counts of drug trafficking, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder, and aiding foreign intelligence operations. But during questioning, he refused to speak. No confessions, no names, no acknowledgement of his empire. He sat in silence, knowing full well that much of the damage had already been done. The arrest made headlines around the world, but for investigators it was only a partial victory. Liam was in custody, but the machine he had built continued to operate in the shadows, still moving money, still influencing events, still answering to no one. Liam Hargraves now sits behind the walls of a maximum security prison, serving 5 consecutive life sentences. His arrest marked the official end of one of the most sophisticated criminal operations the UK had ever seen. But while the headlines declared his empire dismantled, investigators and intelligence analysts knew the truth was far more complicated. The structure he created didn't depend on his presence. It was built to survive without him. Every layer of his organization had redundancy, every connection protected by intermediaries who could continue the operation under new leadership. The forensic accountants assigned to the case uncovered only a fraction of the money believed to have moved through Liam's empire. Of the estimated £300 million sterling, 0 pence in drug and arms profits. Less than 20% has been recovered. Offshore accounts in Eastern Europe remain active, still shifting funds between shell companies and digital wallets. The businesses Liam used as fronts have mostly shut down or changed hands, but several of them reappeared under different names in new jurisdictions, continuing to generate revenue under the same suspicious. More troubling are the missing operatives. At least a dozen key figures in the network vanished in the months following Liam's arrest. Some are believed to be hiding in Eastern Europe, others possibly protected by the same Russian groups who first brought Liam into their circle. Intelligence agencies fear that many of these individuals have since embedded themselves in other criminal enterprises, bringing with them the tactics and connections honed under Liam's guidance. The ripple effects of his empire are still being felt. Arms shipments tied to the original network continue to surface in conflict zones, while political investigators in Moldova and Georgia are still tracing bribes linked to Liam's laundering operations. In the UK, corruption probes have expanded into law enforcement, border control, and even the private banking sector, revealing how deeply the criminal network had penetrated legitimate. In prison, Liam remains silent. He has refused every offer of cooperation, declined all media interviews, and left no written statements. It's widely believed he is protecting those who remain active within the system he created, or perhaps waiting for a deal that will never come. Despite his isolation, his legend continues to grow, both within criminal circles and among law enforcement agencies still trying to untangle the full scope of his activities. The story of Liam Hargraves is not just about drugs or money. It is about how a single, quiet man built a global empire that turned cocaine into political currency, enabled assassinations, and reshaped how modern crime operates, quietly, invisibly, and far beyond the reach of a single arrest.